Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. I hope everyone is doing great today. Thank you for joining Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council's Icebreaker Winter Speakers Series. Today's topic is Line 5, and our speaker is going to be giving us the latest news on the current pipeline and the proposed Great Lakes Tunnel project. My name is Jen DeMoss. I am the Communications Director at Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, and I will be your host for today's event. First, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. So if we want to go ahead and advance the slide, all attendees are going to be muted throughout the webinar to avoid background noises. Anytime during the presentation, you can ask a question by typing your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And please go ahead and make sure to use that Q&A box because we won't be monitoring the chat for questions. After the presentation, there will be time for a Q&A, and we will do our best to answer all of your questions, but given time limitations, we may not be able to. In addition, I do want to mention that today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Watershed Council's YouTube channel at a later date. We have another note for you that might help you out as you're viewing this webinar. So if you want to go ahead and advance the slide. As you will likely see, off to the right-hand side of your screen, there will be a row of talking heads, or maybe just one talking head. If you want to minimize those little screens because they get in the way of the PowerPoint, just click that small gray bar at the top left of that row. So if you're hovering over that row with your cursor, you'll be able to see that. And there, in this picture, there's a red arrow pointing to it on the slide. So that will minimize those boxes. You'll be able to see the PowerPoint without a talking head being in your way. And if at any time you want to expand that back out again, you just hover over that bar and click one of those rectangles to the right of that small bar that we're showing you there. If you want to go ahead and advance. For those of you who are not familiar with the Watershed Council, we are a nonprofit membership-based organization with over 40 years of history protecting and improving water resources in northern Michigan. We protect, restore, and enhance our lakes, streams, wetlands, and groundwater through respected advocacy, innovative education, technically sound water quality monitoring, thorough research, and restoration actions. We achieve our mission by empowering others, and we believe in the capacity to make a positive difference. We work locally, regionally, and throughout the Great Lakes Basin to achieve our goals. And I would also like to recognize at this time that our service area, which you can see there on the map, lies within the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe. We will continue to work alongside them to honor and protect this area for the next 7 generations. And in addition, if you want to go ahead and advance, I'd like to tell you about our Icebreaker Speaker Series that's going to be continuing on Wednesdays from noon to 1 p.m. on Zoom. We've got some really great speakers coming up. We've got Monoman or wild rice, the food that grows on the water, on February 23rd. You can see on March 2nd, we'll be talking about the Little Traverse Bay Bands restoring sturgeon. March 9th, loons and avian botulism. And March 16th, Brian Kosminski from True North Trout will be talking about a lot of the rivers he's been traveling and fishing on for years. You can register on our website. You can either go to the link down below, watershedcouncil.org/attend an event and register, or just straight up go onto our website and search for Icebreakers. You'll be able to register there. And we post these videos on YouTube after they have been edited and after the webinar is over. So you can also find them on our YouTube channel. Today's speaker is Jennifer McKay, the Policy Director for the Watershed Council. Jennifer has been with the Watershed Council for almost 17 years and has spent 12 of those working on oil and gas issues, including Enbridge Line 5. She was appointed by former Governor Snyder to serve on the Michigan Pipeline Safety Advisory Board and continues to serve committees related to emergency response. I'm going to mute myself now and let her take it away. And thank you so much for being here with us today, Jennifer.
I'm muted. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to hear about the status of both current Line 5 pipeline and the proposed Great Lakes Tunnel. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video, and then you can follow Jen's instructions on how to minimize and get rid of the talking heads and the little boxes, so it's not a distraction to you. Just to give you an overview of what we're going to cover today during the webinar, it'll be a bit of basic information and history on Enbridge Line 5 to provide an understanding of where we are today, I'll also provide an update on the litigation pertaining to the current pipeline, as well as the status for the tunnel project. I will also take the opportunity to share with you the Watershed Council's opinion of the tunnel project based upon our review of the permit applications. At the end, we'll have the opportunity for question and answers. So I'm hoping by now, everyone's familiar with Line 5. It's a 645-mile petroleum pipeline owned and operated by Enbridge Energy Limited Partnership. 547 miles of the pipeline are in Michigan. The line runs from Superior, Wisconsin, across Michigan's Upper Peninsula, through northern Michigan, and over to Sarnia, Ontario. Line 5 is 30 inches in diameter, except when it crosses the Straits of Mackinac, where it divides into two 20-inch diameter pipes. The line became operational in 1953 and carries up to 540,000 barrels, which equates to 22.7 million gallons of light crude oil, synthetic crude, and natural gas liquids per day. While most of the focus has been on Line 5 has been on the Straits of Mackinac, it's important to remember that the pipeline crosses nearly 400 water bodies across the state. There's been a long history of Line 5 in Michigan that I don't have time to delve into today. The Watershed Council hosted an icebreaker last year that actually covers much of that history. It's available on the Watershed Council's YouTube channel if you're interested in learning more. The issue of Line 5 actually really heated up back in July of 2010. That was when Enbridge's pipeline in southern Michigan ruptured, releasing heavy crude oil into the Talmadge Creek and Kalamazoo River. That failure represented one of the largest Indian oil spills affecting waterways in U.S. history, and was one of the most expensive cleanups to date. In light of this spill, it's not surprising that the public and governmental attention turned to older pipelines that run throughout Michigan, including Line 5 under the Straits of Mackinac. The Marshall spill led to the creation of a Michigan Petroleum Pipeline Task Force, which was all governmental agencies, with a mandate to take a closer look at pipelines transporting petroleum products around the state, and specifically Line 5. One of the recommendations they had was to create the Michigan Pipeline Safety Advisory Board. Their charge was advising state agencies on matters related to pipeline routing, construction, operation, maintenance, and helping Michigan to better understand the risks, benefits, and alternatives to pipelines. The Safety Advisory Board oversaw two independent analyses of Line 5. One was an alternatives analysis that was to look at the feasibility of other forms of transportation to handle the same amount of product that moves through Line 5. And another was a risk analysis of the potential financial impact of a worst case spill to determine the financial assurance amount as required under the 1953 easement. While the Pipeline Safety Board was underway, former Governor Snyder began signing agreements with Enbridge. In the end, we had 3 agreements that were signed covering a variety of issues, but this was really the official beginning to the Great Lakes Tunnel project. And it was further solidified in December of 2018 when the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority approved an agreement with Enbridge to build a tunnel beneath the Straits of Mackinac to house the pipeline. This agreement was approved at the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority first meeting, which happened just 1 week after former Governor Rick Snyder signed a lame duck bill creating that 3-person panel. After taking office in 2019, Governor Whitmer directed the Michigan Department of Natural Resources to begin a comprehensive review of Enbridge's compliance with the 1953 easement. This 1953 easement created the terms and conditions under which Enbridge is actually allowed to operate the dual pipelines on the bottomlands of the Great Lakes. After a long 15-month review, The governor and DNR director notified Enbridge that the 1953 easement was being revoked and terminated. The state terminated the easement based on Enbridge's persistent and incurable violations of the easement's terms and conditions, including issues related to span management, coating loss, and curvature. As a result, Enbridge was ordered to cease operations of Line 5 in the Straits by May 12, 2021. To date, Enbridge has not ceased operations, and therefore they are now intentionally trespassing on state bottomlands. This leads us to the Line 5 litigation timeline. This can be confusing and convoluted, so I'm going to try and walk you through it in a simple manner. So in June of 2019, our Attorney General, Dana Nessel, filed an original lawsuit against Enbridge, seeking the permanent decommissioning of Line 5. Nessel's lawsuit asked the Ingham County Circuit Court to find that Enbridge's continued operation of the pipelines under the easement violated the public trust, is a common law public nuisance, and violated what's called the Michigan Environmental Protection Act because it's likely to cause pollution impairment and destruction of water and other natural resources. Then, as I noted, in November of 2020, Governor Whitmer revokes and terminates the 1953 easement, allowing Enbridge to operate in the Straits of Mackinac. Again, that notice requires Enbridge to stop using the dual pipelines in the Straits by May of 2021. The state also files a complaint in state court seeking declaratory injunctive relief to require Enbridge to cease operations and to permanently decommission the Straits pipelines in accordance with applicable law and plans approved by the state of Michigan. In response, Enbridge removes that case to federal law. When this happens, that original Attorney General's case from June of 2019 is put on hold. So then the state case regarding the easement termination continues. In October of 2021, the Canadian government invoked a 1977 agreement which governs transit pipelines that operate between the United States and Canada. This is actually the first time that agreement has ever been invoked. And it should be noted that in the agreement, there are specific articles. One is Article 4 that actually allows for the regulation by government authorities, including state agencies, for environmental protection. It also allows for a transit pipeline to be temporarily reduced or stopped in the event of an actual or threatened disaster, an operating emergency, or other demonstrable need, i.e., violation of easement conditions. Again, in November, on November 16th, the U.S. District Judge ruled that the case to revoke the easement for crossing the Straits would remain in federal court. Governor Whitmer, in a statement, said that she respectfully disagrees. However, the governor dropped this case to allow that older lawsuit to move forward. So this is the 2019 AG's case to decommission line. So Enbridge will continue to pursue its case in federal court to affirm federal jurisdiction over the line. So again, Governor Whitmer withdraws from the federal case to allow that original lawsuit to continue. Once again, though, Enbridge is seeking to remove now the original lawsuit to federal court. So where we are today, it brings us all the way back to the beginning. We're back to the original 2019 AG lawsuit to decommission Line 5. And once again, Enbridge is attempting to remove the case to federal court. Federal law clearly establishes the process to remove a suit to federal court. In general, it must be initiated within 30 days after initial filing. There are some other instances where a case can become removable later. If a plaintiff adds new claims, more defendants joins, or a case increases in controversy, there's a 30-day deadline from the date of the operative event that makes it removable. And so this is what Enbridge is arguing, that a case can be removed from state to federal court within 30 days of receiving that solid and unambiguous information. And in this case, that solid and unambiguous information that Enbridge is relying upon is that November 16th ruling that the case would remain in federal court. I should note, in many situations, a case cannot be removed to federal court if it's been more than 1 year since the lawsuit was first filed, which in this case it has been. So at this point in time, we just need to wait and see what the judge decides to do. So the Great Lakes Tunnel Project. Enbridge is in the process of seeking approval to construct and operate, obviously, a pipeline within the tunnel below the bottomlands of the Straits of Mackinac. Enbridge is proposing an approximately 3.58 mile tunnel between Point La Barbe in Michigan's Upper Peninsula to Magoulpin Point in Michigan's Lower Peninsula. Upon completion, a new 30-inch pipeline will replace the dual 20-inch pipelines within the tunnel, and they'll be tied in to the upland portions of Line 5. At the deepest point, the tunnel will be 250 feet beneath the lake bed. A shallow launch portal up to 1,000 feet long, 60 feet wide, and 75 feet deep is to be constructed on the southern port as an entry portal for the tunnel boring machine, which is how they will drill the tunnel, and a circular shaft 70 feet in diameter and 150 feet deep would be constructed on the northern portion as an exit point. Obviously, construction is to start on the southern side and move north. Once tunnel construction begins, it's expected to occur 24 hours, 5 to 6 days a week. The tunnel boring machine is anticipated to move 40 feet per day. So it'll take approximately 2 years to bore and construct the tunnel, presuming that Enbridge doesn't run into any issues along the way. Once that's done, pipeline installation is expected to take an additional 8 months. The tunnel will be constructed through rock, and then there's a deep channel in the straits, and that'll be through glacial deposits. So the top of the tunnel will be approximately 60 feet beneath the lake bed. And again, the deepest point will be 250 feet beneath the lake bed. There will be a precast concrete lining that will be installed with the tunnel boring machine as it's being constructed. And then concrete lining outside the tunnel will be filled with low permeability grouts. So a concrete liner will be about 1 foot thick. Approximately 1,000 cubic yards of material will be removed from underneath the lake bed to construct the tunnel. I often have a difficulty understanding, how much cubic yards and what that truly means. So to put that into reference, 1 cubic yard is enough material to fill half the bed of an average pickup truck. So there will be 182,000 pickup beds full of material removed. Or to put it another way, a cubic yard is larger than the equivalent of 2 general washing machines. So imagine more than 728,000 washing machines stacked up. And that is the volume of lake bed that will be removed during the project. So the tunnel was originally projected to cost $500 million, although those estimates were made earlier in the planning when the tunnel was proposed to be approximately 10 to 12 feet in diameter. Now the tunnel is proposed to be 21 foot in diameter. As a result, Enbridge Energy told the state of Michigan that the preliminary designs for the construction were nearly double the initial $500 million price tag. So we're at $1 billion. So this, cost creep was disclosed in an email to the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority. In addition, it's often promoted that the tunnel would be constructed at no expense to Michigan residents. This is simply not true. Already $4.5 million was appropriated and expended for planning, oversight, and legal services related to the tunnel. So all of us as Michigan citizens have already paid for the Line 5 tunnel and will likely pay more if permits are in fact issued and construction is authorized. So the best way to truly show you the plans for a tunnel project is an animation that Enbridge has developed. For the sake of time, I'm not going to show you the entire video, but it's available on Enbridge's website if you are interested. And I want to make
energy heats our homes. It cooks.
Sure.
Staging areas will be created on both the north and south shores of the Straits. On the south side, a large portal will be created as the entry point for a tunnel boring machine. The portal will be sheltered to reduce noise and protect workers from the elements. A slurry separation plant will also be established on the south shore. The slurry is a mixture of rocks, pebbles, clay, and water that will be pumped out of the tunnel when excavation begins. Once the components are separated at the plant, water is reused for the tunneling process. On the north side, a vertical shaft will be built to retrieve and dismantle the tunnel boring machine once it has crossed the Straits. The tunnel boring machine is about 500 feet long and is made up of thousands of components. It will be assembled in the south side portal over the course of 3 to 4 months. As the tunnel boring machine chews through limestone, shale, and other rock formations, it lifts segments of a 1-foot-thick reinforced concrete liner into place. Grout completes the seal. The excavated rock slurry will be pumped back to the surface. The separation plant breaks down the slurry with rocks, gravel, and silt, sent to off-site disposal areas under appropriate environmental guidelines. Because of the high hydrostatic pressure below the lake bed, saturation divers will be used to perform regular inspection and maintenance. These divers live in pressure chambers on the surface for weeks at a time and are transported down in a pressurized habitat at the head of the tunnel boring machine to do their work. The tunnel boring machine will move up to 40 feet a day, 5 days a week, and will take about 2 years to make its way across the full 4 miles under the Straits. Once the tunnel boring machine reaches the shaft on the north shore, it's dismantled and removed in pieces. Segments of the new Line 5 pipeline will be welded, inspected, and coated on the south side in a staging area. Pipe supports with rollers will be bolted along the tunnel wall, and the pipe will be pushed along that roller system, one long segment at a time. The new pipeline will be connected to the existing Line 5 on both the north and south shores, and the current Line 5 Straits crossing deactivated. The tunnel is equipped with drainage.
Okay, so as the video said, once the tunnel and the new pipeline are completed, the existing Line 5 would then be decommissioned. And Enbridge has proposed two decommissioning alternatives for the existing pipeline. One would be to abandon it in place. The other would be to remove the exposed portions of Line 5 that are between the 65-foot depth contours. So those that are actually exposed on the bottom land. The portions of the pipelines landward of the 65-foot depth that are currently buried in sediment are proposed to remain. Sorry, got too ahead of myself and did it again. For the Great Lakes Tunnel project to begin, Enbridge needs a multitude of approvals from the state of Michigan, federal and local permits. In April 2020, Enbridge submitted a multiple permit applications to the Michigan the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy under a variety of state statutes, including Part 303, which is wetlands protection, Part 325, which is the Submerged Lands Act, Part 327, which regulates water withdrawals, and Part 325, which is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And that is for water discharges into public waters of Michigan. So the state approved activity in coastal wetlands on the north sides of the Straits. They also authorized the discharge of an average of approximately 1.4 million gallons of treated wastewater per day into the Straits of Mackinac. The permit allows for an actual discharge peak capacity of 5 million gallons per day. In addition, any construction activity that allows groundwater to infiltrate into the shaft and the tunnel would be captured and treated and discharged into the Straits. It's predicted that approximately 1,500 gallons per day would be generated on the north side, and approximately 15,000 up to 75,000 gallons per day would be generated on the south side. If in fact the pipeline is constructed, the pipeline would also have to undergo a hydrostatic pressure test. And this is where the pipeline is filled with water and pressurized to ensure that it is properly constructed and does not leak. I will note, Eagle punted many decisions to the federal government, which is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. For example, the State Historic Preservation Office recommended additional surveys to identify historic properties in the project area, and Eagle did not require any of the additional surveys, but is letting the Corps address these concerns. Eagle's also letting the Corps deal with threatened and endangered species that are located on the site. I will also note that one of the permits has been contested by the Bay Mills Indian community, A contested case is basically a quasi-judicial proceeding before an administrative law judge that determines if the permit decisions made by the department comply with applicable laws and regulations and are supported by the record. And parties can also appeal final decisions in circuit court. So while Eagle has approved permits, they are being contested and could potentially be modified based upon the contested cases. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is still reviewing permits for the tunnel project. They're reviewing it under a number of laws and regulations, including what is called Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbor Act, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. The decision for those on whether to issue the permit will be based basically on an evaluation of the probable impacts of the proposed activity on the public interest. And so they'll consider a lot of factors, including, impacts on economics, wetlands, fish and wildlife values, recreation, water quality, energy needs, and basic overall impacts to the needs and welfare of the people. They're also going to look at impacts on federally listed threatened and endangered species under Section 7. We know for in fact that it's going to impact 2 plant species, Houghton's goldenrod and dwarf lake iris. They're also, because the state punted, going to look at impacts to historic preservation. The Corps is going to consult with the federally recognized tribes to help identify historic properties that may be present and how they might be impacted. And really, in some really positive news, in June of last year, the Corps announced that they're going to conduct an environmental impact statement for the tunnel project. An EIS, as it's commonly known, basically thoroughly describes and analyzes the proposed action, which may have a significant impact on the environment. And the Corps decided to do this because, as we all know, the Straits of Mackinac is a unique geographic area, hydrologically connecting Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, but it also contains cultural resources, again, federally listed species, high quality coastal wetlands. It's critically important to tribal, national, and regional economy because of its fishery resources, its navigable waters. The permit application is considered to be highly controversial. The Corps received over 15,000 comments on the project. Additionally, 13 federally recognized tribes opposed the project in either written comments or consultation meetings. And they asserted that the permit application invalidates their treaty rights and adversely impacts what's called a traditional cultural landscape. So for this, the process for an EIS generally takes 2 to 3 years if it is not challenged. So it's subsequently going to delay any permit decision for Enbridge. The first step is for the Corps to identify and engage a third-party contractor that will assist in the preparation of the EIS. And from there will be actually multiple opportunities for the public to engage along the way. So stay tuned. Again, similarly, in April of 2020, Enbridge applied with the Michigan Public Service Commission, or MPSC, to request authority to replace and relocate the segment of Line 5 crossing the Straits of Mackinac into the tunnel. The MPSC has authority for siting of crude oil and petroleum pipelines. They operate under a quasi-judicial manner where the commission makes final decisions through a formal evidentiary hearing process. Cross-examination began at the beginning of this year, and the hearing process is expected to continue through March. A decision is anticipated by the MSPC in June of this year. There has been some key testimony provided through this process. The first is by Richard Kuperitz, who's a chemical engineer with nearly 50 years in the oil and gas industry, whose background includes extensive work in emergency response, pipeline incident command. He's providing expert testimony on behalf of the Bay Mills Indian community. And his main point is that there is a potential for a release into the straits from the tunnel by way of a catastrophic explosion. So the risk of transporting crude oil and especially propane is not negligible or eliminated for the Straits of Mackinac, which is what is being said by Enbridge. Propane and crude oil are highly hazardous and volatile substances, and together in a confined space like a tunnel can generate a tremendous amount of pressure, especially upon detonation. So as you can see, he noted a release in this unique environment carries the risk of both loss of human life and the release of crude oil and propane into the Great Lakes, as an explosion in such a confined structure will most likely violate the tunnel's secondary containment intent. This explosion opportunity was also described by another expert as, with the space between the pipeline and the inner tunnel wall, the right conditions can converge and make the tunnel like a barrel of a gun with no place for the energy to dissipate safely. So I don't know about all the participants, but I know I do not want a gun going off in the Straits of Mackinac. And we've heard the saying, history repeats itself. And so the following are excerpts from a December 12th, 1971 report from the Detroit News. 17 workers died and 21 survived a roaring natural gas explosion, which ripped through the Detroit Water Board intake tunnel 230 feet below the shoreline of Lake Huron Saturday afternoon. Rescue workers said the blast must have been something like that would happen in a gun barrel. The force was so great, the bodies of the dead were limbless and some were decapitated. The tunnel project has been plagued by controversy, mishaps, and changes of plan. Construction began in spring of 1968. When completed, the tunnel, which extends 5 miles out from the shoreline and under the Lake Huron bottom, will take in water for the vast network which serves southeastern Michigan, including Detroit. Witnesses said the blast occurred at 3:11 p.m. Its severity sent debris sailing into the air at both its ends on the Port Huron mainland and from the Coffer Dam at the intake 5 miles offshore. Corrugated metal air ducts, which carried air to workmen along the tunnel, were ripped to shreds. Some of the pipes rolled into twisted balls of metal with knife-like edges. 1 ton piece of machinery was thrown backward 40 feet. So the photos from the Detroit News archives, the captions that go along with it, the one on the right, the blast created a shockwave with a speed of 40 miles an hour and a force of 15,000 pounds per square inch. The picture on the right, tools and chunks of concrete were turned into deadly projectiles. A 50-ton crane was thrown more than 1/3 of a mile. And the picture on the right, or the picture on the left, I'm sorry, shows the actual concrete tunnel did not make it through the explosion. Is this really what we want to repeat? Such a horrific incident in Michigan's history? The Michigan Public Service Commission also ruled that it must consider evidence of greenhouse gas pollution caused by the petroleum flowing through Line 5 as it decides the decision. This decision was historic. It's the first time that Michigan regulators have factored greenhouse gas emissions into their scrutiny of a project's environmental impacts under the Michigan's Environmental Protection Act. And so now we have new testimony from scientists that revealed the implications of the future plans for Line 5. According to the analysis, the tunnel project and pipeline could contribute an additional 27 million metric tons of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere annually and generate 41 billion in climate damages between 2027 and 2017. By enabling the continued long-term production and combustion of oil, construction of the project would work against and be inconsistent with the goals of the Global Paris Agreement and Michigan's Healthy Climate Plan. Michigan's Healthy Climate Plan was created by Governor Gretchen Whitmer in 2020 to develop new clean energy jobs and put Michigan on track to achieving carbon neutrality by the next century. So for several years, the Watershed Council has devoted significant time and resources throughout our service area and in Michigan to prevent an oil and natural gas liquids disaster from the Line 5 pipeline. We've worked with Enbridge, we've commented on state and federal agencies' proposals, we've hosted educational workshops and events. I served on the Michigan Pipeline Safety Advisory Board, and we intervened in the Michigan Public Service Commission case. We've recently received pushback from some members that disagree with our position on the Line 5 Great Lakes Tunnel permitting process. This includes individuals who no longer want to be members or members who don't want to donate because of our position. As a member-based organization that relies on donations to conduct our work, this is concerning. So I want to take time to very clearly explain why the Watershed Council has significant environmental concerns about the tunnel project. First is impact to Great Lakes coastal wetlands. So Great Lakes coastal wetlands are considered to be some of the most valuable ecological areas in the Great Lakes, and they're critical to the Great Lakes ecosystem as a whole. Across the Great Lakes, 2/3 of coastal wetlands have been dredged, drained, or converted to other uses since pre-settlement times. So those that we have remaining provide untold functions and values. They provide critical habitat for fish and wildlife, erosion control, water quality protection, recreational values. According to the Great Lakes Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program, the proposed tunnel site is within one of the most pristine Great Lakes coastal wetlands in Lake Michigan and Huron. The site is used as a benchmark, meaning it's one of the best we have in Lake Michigan and Huron. Threatened endangered species. We have Houghton's goldenrod and dwarf lake iris, both federally listed threatened species. They are both present on the north side in Mackinac County. Based on a 2019 survey, we have approximately 3,777 Houghton goldenrod plants. We have 7,757 dwarf lake iris plants, all of which will be impacted by the project. And Enbridge is only proposing to relocate 50% of the plants to mitigate for the loss. Migratory birds. The Straits of Mackinac are continentally important for waterfowl and waterbird migration. We have tens to hundreds of thousands of individuals passing throughout the area. Many of the migrating birds nest and feed in large numbers in the Straits near Mackinac Bridge and the Line 5 pipeline area. The species we commonly see include 25 species of waterfowl, common loons, grubs, cormorants, many of which have both a high ecological value as well as a great economic value as game species. In addition, over 50,000 raptors, including bald and golden eagles, migrate over the Straits region each year. And we have summer breeding birds, which include some federally endangered species, such as the piping plover. We have tribal fishing Fishery rights. So the proposed project occurs within the area of the 1836 treaty territory for Michigan tribes. 5 of the 12 recognized Indian tribes in Michigan are parties to this treaty. This reserves off-reservation hunting and fishing rights throughout the ceded territory, which comprises approximately 40% of present-day Michigan. The Straits of Mackinac are located in the center of that territory. There are many members of the 5 treaty tribes who are commercial fishermen and depend upon the Great Lakes fishery for their livelihood, and a substantial proportion of those tribes' fish harvest comes from the Straits of Mackinac. In addition, many of those tribes have tourism-based economy that depend upon the Great Lakes. Risk of explosion. This came up during the Michigan Public Service Commission case, but the possibility of accidents causing a catastrophic underground explosion in the proposed tunnel is real. We've often heard that the Great Lakes Tunnel will eliminate the risk of a spill or catastrophic event in the Straits, and this is simply not true. Sending hazardous and volatile gases and crude oil through a pipeline enclosed in a tunnel, in fact, enhances the risk of explosion, and the electrical equipment inside the tunnel could ignite those hydrocarbon vapors, causing an explosion, which could cause a release or spill into the Straits. We have cultural resources in the Straits. According to John O'Shea, who's the curator of the Great Lakes Archaeology, no new surveys were conducted for cultural resources for the assessment. He acknowledged that there are cultural deposits which are very likely present and visible in previous sonar imagery, and they're about as significant as the site could be, given the small number of sites from this time period. And it would be unique, particularly in Lake Michigan, because it would be the first instance to be documented. He noted that at the same time that sites are extremely vulnerable to disturbance and likely would be obliterated by the proposed tunneling. In addition, we also have the State Historic Preservation Office that provided Eagle with a letter requesting additional information, specifically a professional archaeological survey of additional areas, as well as other items. And this is yet to be accomplished. And we also have climate change. As noted, the Stockholm Environment Institute emissions expert, Peter Erickson, testified that the tunnel would lead to about 27 million metric tons or 59.5 billion pounds of additional carbon dioxide emissions, as opposed to a future in which the pipeline is closed and no tunnel is built. And this is annual emissions. I'm putting a cost to that from 2027 to 2070. The average annual cost would be approximately 1 billion each year over this period, plus the significant unmonetized climate effects and other unquantified pollution costs to human health and the environment. So this is why the Watershed Council has not supported the tunnel project. And until these concerns are addressed, the Watershed Council will continue to work to prevent these impacts. And as I noted, the Watershed Council has gotten pushback from our position on the Great Lakes Tunnel. Those that have shared their disagreement with our position, unfortunately, tend to base their position not on reasons related to water resource issues, as I just laid out, but other issues. So I do want to take a quick moment to address other issues associated with the Great Lakes Tunnel that are not directly related to water resources. We often hear that if Line 5 is shut down and the Great Lakes Tunnel is not built, we'll see an energy crisis in Michigan. In particular, we hear propane prices will skyrocket and people in the UP will freeze. In reality, there are multiple sources of propane in both the UP and Lower Peninsula. In the UP, propane is supplied, especially in the Eastern UP, from the NGL Supplies Terminal facility in Kinchlow. It receives propane via direct rail shipment from Edmonton to Alberta. In addition, some propane is supplied to the UP from out-of-state sources, including the Plains Midstream Propane Fractionator in Superior, Wisconsin. Other sources of supply for the Lower Peninsula include, but are not limited to, the Lambda Energy Resources natural gas processing plant in Kalkaska, the Marathon Oil Company, Detroit Refinery, and sources in neighboring states. Furthermore, the governor released a My Propane Security Plan to ensure resilience with Outline 5. It outlined multiple steps, many already underway, to ensure that Michigan residents who heat their homes with propane will have a secure energy supply when Line 5 shuts down. This includes optimizing and enhancing propane storage capacity, reducing propane consumption through energy efficiency measures, and investments in rail infrastructure. In addition, independent experts from London Economics International concluded that Line 5 can be decommissioned without any noticeable or significant economic impact to the state, its citizens, or businesses. Their studies have demonstrated that the cost increases are low relative to typical propane, oil, and gas price volatility and would be minimal to industry and consumers. Alternatives do exist that would address the risks associated with the entire pipeline infrastructure, address Michigan energy needs, and could be implemented with little or no impact on Michigan's economy. There have been long discussions about how much of a benefit Line 5 provides from delivery of crude oil to Michigan. Canada uses the majority of Line 5 oil. Much of Line 5's light crude oil is delivered to Sarnia, Ontario, then transported to refineries in Eastern Canada and the United States, according to the 2017 Dynamic Risk Study. According to Enbridge, Line 5 carries up to 540,000 barrels per day of product. About 432,000 barrels of that is crude oil. Of that 432,000 barrels of oil, about 70% or 302,400 barrels goes directly through Michigan and across the St. Clair River to Sarnia. Some of the crude oil goes to the Marysville terminal where it connects to a Sunoco line and is transported to a Marathon refinery in Detroit and to others in Toledo. But the Detroit Marathon now uses only about 15,000 barrels of the light crude per day. They primarily rely on Enbridge's other pipeline for heavy crude. This might explain why Canada and Ohio are the two biggest proponents for keeping Line 5 operating at the risk of Michigan's waterways. We always hear about warnings that shutting down Line 5 would cause gas prices to go through the ceiling. And just look at some of the direct quotes from Enbridge. Line 5 shutdown would cause a shortfall of 14.7 million gallons of gas, diesel, and jet fuel a day. However, according to the U.S. Energy Information Association, the oil Line 5 sends to Detroit and Ohio refineries daily would produce about 66,614 barrels of gasoline, 36,677 barrels of diesel fuel, and about 8,035 barrels of jet fuel. If you add all this up, it equates to only 467,569 gallons of gas, diesel, and jet fuel a day, which is far less than the 14.7 million claimed by Enbridge. In addition, we witnessed firsthand that there were no impacts at the gas pump as a result of a temporary Line 5 shutdown. Both legs of the underwater pipeline at the Straits of Mackinac were shut down in June of 2021 by court order because of damage to a pipeline support. The east leg of the pipeline was not allowed to restart until September. So during those 3+ months, not only did gas prices not increase, but Michigan remained about 3.5 cents less than the national price. And again, according to Enbridge, a temporary shutdown would have severe consequences for Michigan's economy and result in about 45% less crude oil flowing to refineries in the region. But this never came to fruition. As for the jobs argument, in 2020, Enbridge employed a total of 107 Michigan-based permanent and temporary employees and contractors. Enbridge is simply not a significant employer in our state or northern Michigan communities, and the tunnel project will not bring a significant number of jobs to northern Michigan. The Great Lakes Tunnel Project is expected to provide 200 jobs, and many of those jobs will be highly specialized jobs. If the argument is truly about jobs, we should look at decommissioning Line 5. According to the State Commission report on alternatives, decommissioning the pipeline would bring in more short-term jobs, approximately 2,000 compared to 200. However, the state can create significantly more jobs by focusing on the infrastructure upgrades desperately needed throughout our state, to our roads, our drinking and wastewater. And again, it's also important to remember that the Great Lakes themselves support more than 1.3 million jobs that generate $82 billion in wages annually. And these jobs themselves are at risk should there be an oil spill from Line 5. Finally, the economy. In 2020, Enbridge paid $67 million in property tax for the pipelines and facility in Michigan. And while I fully recognize the property taxes are significant to local municipalities in northern Michigan and the UP, what is provided in property taxes is hardly comparable to the $1.9 billion cost estimate should a spill occur in the Straits. This estimate, which comes from the risk analysis commissioned by the state of Michigan, covers the cost to government, recreational damages, and lost income for tourism and recreational businesses, all of which would devastate the counties in northern Michigan and the UP. This cost doesn't even take into account the cost of irreversible damage to the natural resources, human health impacts, commercial fish products, subsistence fisheries, and more. And I would be remiss if I did not mention how important and influential the tribes have been to Line 5 and the Great Lakes discussions. All 12 federally recognized tribes in Michigan have formally opposed Line 5. The tribes say the pipeline threatens the Great Lakes and numerous precious rivers and streams, impacting tribal nations, reserve fishing, hunting, and gathering rights under the 1836 Treaty of Washington. In fact, the Bay Mills Indian Community Executive Council passed a resolution to banish Line 5 dual pipelines from all tribal lands, including the Straits. And banishment is not taken lightly by the tribes. According to the Native American Rights Fund, tribes exercise banishment only to address especially egregious acts of harm to the community. The fact that the tribes, all 13 federally recognized tribes, opposed the Great Lakes Tunnel was instrumental in the U.S. Army Corps of Decision for an EIS, but more so was the fact that the Straits of Mackinac is considered a traditional cultural landscape and property that is eligible for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. In addition, while many parties intervened in the Michigan Public Service Commission case, including the Watershed Council, it is the tribes, along with the Environmental Law and Policy Center, that are the entities providing testimony and conducting the cross-examination. The tribes have also sent a letter to President Biden urging him to uphold treaty obligations and decommission Line 5. And as a result, the State Department has invited the tribes to provide input prior to the talks with Canada under the 1977 agreement. And lastly, but most important, is the treaty rights themselves. And perhaps most crucial and most relevant is, again, that 1836 Treaty of Washington, where at the nexus is the Straits of Mackinac. That treaty, signed 185 years ago in Washington, D.C., ceded lands, but at the same point in time, guaranteed hunting, fishing, and gathering rights to the tribes for as long as the grass grows, the wind blows, and the rivers flow. And this treaty predates the agreement that Canada invoked to try and allow Line 5 to continue. And I believe this may be a crucial point and serve as a linchpin as Canada and the US continue discussions and as litigation continues. And so with that, I went long. I apologize, but I thank you. And I will stop sharing and start my video.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm going to remind everyone before we get started with the Q&A portion to please go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A box. We won't be monitoring the chat, so just to let you know, that's where you need to put your questions. If you don't have any questions today and you plan on leaving the event, thank you so much for coming. Just remember to register for our upcoming Watershed Council events at our website, www.watershedcouncil.org. You can also just go to our website and search for icebreakers. After this webinar, you should receive an email with a link to the recording and also a link to a survey about the webinar. We really value your feedback, so please respond to the survey. It shouldn't take you very long at all. We're really curious to see how things went today. So Jennifer McKay, are you ready for some questions?
Sure.
All right. We had one question in terms of excavating for the Line 5 tunnel. Do you have any information about where an excavating pit might go? Is there a plan anywhere in any of the counties for hauling the material over the county roads? Where will it end up? Emmett County Road Commission has expressed concern around this issue specifically.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a great question. In the permit application, Enbridge has identified that they will dispose of the materials in appropriate landfills. They did not designate where those landfills will be. But as I noted, it will be a significant amount of truck traffic. I know Enbridge is trying to find some reuse for the materials. But then there's concern about the fact that it's coming from being excavated through the use of a slurry. So there's also other materials in it as far as bentonite and others. So I'm not sure about the reuse material, but it will be a significant amount of truck traffic. And where it's going is going to be very crucial and will be needed to be discussed as far as local permitting, both in Mackinac and Sheboygan County, potentially even Emma County, depending on where they go. So it's a very great question, and this is why local municipalities need to be involved.
Another question kind of around the same area, geographic location. How close is that southern end of the proposed tunnel to the Dark Sky Park?
Oh, I don't know off of the top of my head. There were concerns raised about the Dark Sky Park and the fact that during construction, Enbridge obviously will be doing blasting, will have lots of work to construct the facility on the north end. Unfortunately, during the permit application process, the North Sky Park is out of the purview of Enbridge's permitting authority.
Okay. Another question, any thoughts on today's approval by the MSCA of Enbridge's RFP for a tunnel contractor? Is it a major step toward the tunnel being built?
I will unfortunately have to get back to you because I have not seen the RFP that was approved today, but it is a major step and I will get back to you. Okay, thank you for the question.
Another question, what is your prediction for the future of Line 5 and the Great Lakes Tunnel project?
That's a great question. So obviously I don't have a crystal ball. But you know, the first thing is obviously nothing is going to happen in the near term as far as construction or moving forward. So Even though Eagle has already permitted the application, there's a contested case that has to happen. And MPSC might make a decision, but nothing can happen without the Army Corps of Engineers permit. And that will take, again, a couple years. And so if you remember, Enbridge wanted to start construction in 2001, which didn't happen. They wanted to complete the tunnel project in 2014. That will not happen. If they're lucky, they will have a decision by the Army Corps of Engineers in 2014, if they are lucky. So the fact is, it's significantly delayed. As far as the court cases, I'm not a judge, so I can't tell you what a judge would rule. What I do think will come into play very much is the tribal treaties versus the 1977 agreement with Canada. And if I was a judge, I could tell you what I would think. Obviously, we have, a treaty which has more authority than an agreement. And again, that treaty was written 141 years before an agreement. So if I was a judge, I would rule a certain way, but I'm not the judge.
We have another request for information. You mentioned the Lake Huron pipeline explosion. Can you go back and tell people the date of that publication?
It was December 17th, 1971.
Okay. And it was at the Detroit Times?
No, it was, okay, let me double check my notes to make sure. My presentation. Hang on one second, just to make sure I'm not giving you false information.
Oh yeah, no worries. Take your time.
Okay, it was the Detroit News Archives. And yes, it was December 12th, 1971.
Okay. And it was at about a blast that killed 17 workers in a tunnel, correct?
Yes, and in the follow-up email, I'm glad to provide, we can provide the link.
Okay, great.
To the original story. They did, there's been some 50-year stories commemorating the workers that passed away. So, but I'm glad to provide the link to the original article and the story that I did the excerpts from.
Okay, perfect. Another question, what are opportunities for public engagement in the core permit process and how can we be notified?
It's a great question. So there will be multiple opportunities. So once the Corps determines who the third-party contractor is, they will do what's called a scoping process, and that determines they'll take public comment on what they think should be included in the EIS and what it should cover. And then in addition, the draft EIS will go out for public comment. So the Watershed Council will provide notice through our emails, our website, our social media. So if you want to ensure that you receive those notices, become a member of the Watershed Council, you'll get our emails. We usually also provide talking points to help assist you with your comments. But there will definitely be those two public comment periods, which will be essential for everyone to assist in.
Okay, perfect. We do have a couple more questions. You spoke about new jobs estimated for the possible tunnel project, and you talked about some of those being temporary jobs. Do you have any information about how many of those would be Michigan jobs, how long they might last, or anything like that?
So the construction of the majority of those jobs would actually be trucking the material that is taken from the lake bed out. And again, the process of digging the tunnel will take 2 years based upon the 40-foot per day that the tunnel boring machine can go. So it's anticipated that the majority of those jobs would last for 2 years.
Okay. And then one last one here. Do the agreements approved in 2018 by the state continue to guarantee that all damages from an oil spill will be paid by Enbridge?
Fantastic question. No, they do not. And so it was, this came up during the Department of Natural Resources review of the 1953 easement, that there is in fact a loophole that the 1953 easement and the agreements signed by, between the state of Michigan and the Enbridge, was all signed by subsidiaries and not in fact by the Enbridge Inc. Corporation. Therefore, the Enbridge Inc. Corporation is not held to be liable for the $1.9 billion estimate that a worst case scenario spill would be in the Straits of Mackinac. The state actually requested the Enbridge sign a new document to take liability for that $1.9 billion. Enbridge refused and simply stated that we take responsibility for all of our spills on all of our pipelines. So in actuality, it could be the state of Michigan that is responsible for the cleanup if a spill should it occur.
Okay, perfect. I see we're running late. Thank you so much, Jen McKay, for staying late to answer some questions. We really appreciate it. And there's obviously going to be a lot more to the story and we'll keep you updated. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. And we really appreciate y'all for taking your time out today for this icebreaker. We've got some more coming up, so please feel free to join us. And keep an eye out, please, for that survey and for the recording that we're going to be sending to you within about a week. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.